There's something about elephants. I don't know what it is. When I think about elephant folklore, what first springs to mind is a story that is both mythical and factual. At Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York, sometime in the mid-1970s, a classroom full of future priests, ministers, social workers, and well-wishers were having a discussion about feminism. And a young lady said something like, "So what do we need men for anyway? Except for conception, women can handle everything ourselves." And a handsome young guy stood up and said, "Well, I've just returned from living in Kenya. And with the African elephant, the guys show up once a year and fertilize the herd, then wander off, and the lady elephants handle everything without them. Is that what you have in mind?" And that young lady lifted the heavy stack of theology textbooks in front of her and launched them across the room at this guy who looked a bit like me. And she stormed out, and I think you can guess where the story is headed. That's how my parents met. My mom was that angry feminist's friend who stayed after class to gather her books and papers from the floor, and my dad stayed after also to help, and their eyes met, and then my sister was born. Now, unlike the African elephant, my dad stayed around consistently while my siblings and I grew up. And my mom's friend, who threw her books that day, had a couple of kids with a guy who then wandered off like the African elephant, leaving her to handle everything herself as if men didn't exist. The moral of that story is that we shouldn't be afraid to discuss feminism in mixed company. That's why God made tables, so we can duck and cover. But even if we have trouble staying dispassionate in the debate, or if someone mansplains the mating cycles of the African elephant and someone else hurls a bombardment of hardcover books, the story can still have a happy ending. My parents are living happily ever after in Baltimore and Albuquerque, which is about as far apart as you can get without leaving the North American continent. This thing about elephants being matriarchal is true. Elephant herds tend to be the female descendants of a grandmother elephant, plus all of the offspring. Male elephants live alone or in small bachelor herds and only visit the family when they want something. I don't know if elephants are feminists. I assume the question never arises in their herds. But I've noticed that we humans tend to have a strong feeling of connection with the elephant. It's an animal we instinctively think we can learn from. And yet, when we raise elephants in captivity, we insist that they live in isolated Christian nuclear families. One bull, one cow, heiferfant, whatever they call a lady elephant, Eleanor. Anyway, the prudent zookeepers always insist that an elephant family's gotta be a mommy, a daddy, and baby. And yet, these Christian family values are entirely alien to the elephant. Perhaps this is the reason that they so rarely mate in captivity. Female elephants want to hang out with female elephants. They don't want to be self-conscious all the time. It would make more sense for each zoo to have 2 females and then have one bull elephant travel the country visiting each year. And I now realize why they don't do that. It sends an unsavory message to the kids on the 2nd grade field trip. Elephants may or may not be a good example of feminism. Elephants also may or may not be a good example of realistic expectations about a male partner. But for our purpose here today, let's remember that for most of Western history, nobody knew anything about the mating and cohabitating habits of elephants. No one could get close enough to determine the genders in a herd. Until about 200 years ago, in most of Europe, the elephant was a mythical creature, no more real than a unicorn, something that you'd heard about in old legends, and a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend had once seen one on some improbable journey. That's why they call the group a herd, because it was all hearsay. Anyway, if we're going to explore the bizarre history of the elephant as role model, it will only make sense if we remember that the elephant was only an ideal to people who knew nothing about them. 2,000 years ago, in the century when Jesus and the Caesars roamed the earth, the Roman scientist known as Pliny the Elder wrote, "The elephant has a religious respect for the stars and a veneration for the sun and moon. It is said by some authors that at the first appearance of the new moon, herds climb down from the forest to a river and purify themselves in solemn form by sprinkling their bodies with water, after which, having saluted the heavenly moon, they return to the woods, carrying their sleepy babies. Pliny also reported on one of the times when elephants were brought to Rome. There had been a great curiosity about them in Greece and Rome ever since Alexander the Great encountered them in his travels to India. Everybody wanted to see one. So the celebrity general Pompey Magnus imported some elephants to battle in the Circus Maximus, the Roman Colosseum, because this was the Roman way of appreciating novelty and diversity, getting drunk and watching exotic animals and abductees hack each other to death in the Colosseum. Like modern Americans want to watch the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins clash in football arenas, but if we were Romans, we'd find a way to get real dolphins and real bisons to battle in a flooded Colosseum, and then throw in some Panthers, Raiders, and Chiefs to make it interesting. Anyway, the citizens of Rome were into watching all manner of barbaric cruelty between species, tigers, ostriches, every combination you could imagine, and Pompey thought the elephants would be quite a sensation in the Circus Maximus. But when the elephants were caged near the Colosseum, they began crying, weeping, and the drunken Roman sports fans were so moved with pity and compassion that they rose up against Pompey, demanding that these beasts be released. The Roman lawyer Cicero reported that the mob was greatly impressed by the elephants, but manifested no pleasure. Indeed, the result, he says, was a certain compassion and a kind of feeling that the huge beast has a fellowship with the human race. I'm fascinated by these two moments, the Roman mob identifying elephants as fellow humans, and the belief that, of all animals, only elephants practice religion. This new moon baptism pilgrimage certainly does sound like a spiritual ritual. Medieval Christians seized upon this as evidence that elephants are fellow Christians, although this would seem more like some kind of Wiccan lunar goddess ritual, especially when we consider that adult elephants accompanied by babies would all be female. So it was more like a witchcraft Sabbath than a Sunday morning mass. And if elephants believe in a lunar goddess, would they envision her in human or elephant form? I would think, obviously, elephant. And if female elephants envisioned a holy trinity, I think they'd all be female. I don't think it would even occur to them to include a bull. My personal faith in the moonlight pachyderm baptism is strengthened by the noted pattern that elephants never forget when and where their favorite fruit will ripen and ferment. They will travel great distances, stampeding at 25 miles an hour when the Borassus palm fruit ripens. They need to get there before all the primates show up. The good news is that elephants don't have to wait until the fruit begins to ferment. Their digestion process is so long that the fruit will actually turn to wine in their intestines. An elephant's belly is a portable wine barrel. Intoxicated elephants have been observed making lewd gestures with their trunks and ears, and making sounds normally associated with mating, but without clear mating intention. In other words, drunk elephants tell dirty jokes, and their elephant friends just love it. This is even more comical when we consider the recent scientific discovery that elephants can communicate in ultrasound frequencies that cannot be heard by the human ear. And this raises the question of whether this playful obscenity is part of a performance lampooning the human observer. A group of trained spectacle elephant performers with a cafeteria-style diet in their barn was once offered an optional ration of ale, and unsurprisingly, these circus elephants became alcoholics, guzzling 7 liters with dinner. That's approximately 35 cans of beer. It was then found that, when tipsy, they staggered around. One of them wrapped his trunk around himself obscenely, delighting the others, and when their handler commanded them to walk in a straight line, each clutching another one's tail with his trunk, they could not take it seriously. Early Christians seized upon Pliny's description of the moonlight baptism, and never mind that he didn't claim to be an eyewitness and never named his source, to trumpet the belief that of all non-human animals, only the elephant is capable of religion. And being Christians, they assumed the elephants must be Christian too. The belief in elephant baptism went hand in hand, or tail in trunk, with ideas about elephant burial. Now, the elephant burial ground seems to be a mythical thing, but elephants in the wild do pick up some vegetation and lay it over a deceased friend or relative, which is a sort of burial. That's an act that can't be explained in terms of subsistence or reproductive success. It's not a survival strategy. So I do have to wonder what's on its mind. An elephant's mind, I just learned, weighs about 11 pounds, which is 4 times the size and weight of a human brain. Medieval bestiaries, which were popular zoology books with a mix of factual and fantastical animals, claimed that elephants remember the location of the Garden of Eden and still use it as their secret mating ground. I hope so. If humans can't roam naked in Eden anymore, someone should still get to use it for a romantic hideaway. Throughout Western civilization, humans seem to feel a special bond with the elephant, more than the chimpanzee or the orangutan, or even a member of the opposing political party. Boreas Sachs wrote that elephants strike a responsive chord in us because they mirror our sense of alienation from the natural world. This is the creature whose nose is a tentacle with a sort of hand at the end of it. Clearly, the existence of this thing is evidence of something playful in the mind of some creator or in the chaos of mutations. Or maybe the elephant was designed by 5 blindfolded beings, none of whom could agree on what it should be, and they're still trying to figure out what it is. I don't know. All I can do is say something stupid about elephants. But if it wasn't for a guy saying something stupid about elephants, I wouldn't even exist. Thank you for listening. Please click to like this episode, and we'll be back with more of elephants and